What is up, bros and broettes? Luchazar here, and today I've decided to temporarily pivot away from unqualified influencers and address the opposite side of the spectrum. In other words, that even qualified trainers at times do make mistakes, knowingly or unknowingly, myself included. May it be due to drawing conclusions based on the currently existing evidence or beliefs at the time, which sometimes change, perhaps a personal bias, or frankly any other reason. A quick example here would be the muscle confusion, whereby influencers a few years back swore that variety drives growth.
What we're going to do is we're going to mix up the workouts, we're going to confuse the body, and we're going to keep the body guessing. We're not going to be on a set program.
Hi, babe. Yeah.
Which has slowly faded away, and most professionals now suggest progressive overload and consistency over novelty. Meanwhile, this does not particularly villainize creators. Some viewers may experience them as inconsistent, where the creator's aim may be open-mindedness to new research over holding a stance they once genuinely believed in, but now know better for the sake of sticking to their guns. Having said that, I would like to bring forward an example of a qualified fitness professional. Now, I happen to actually know this individual, as we attend the same gym. However, I have no personal agenda against him. I'm also not going to be speaking in absolutes and claim all his content is false, because that wouldn't be correct either. In fact, most of it does make sense. Instead, I would like to outline a few examples where he falls short of factuality, and I would advise viewers to not take credentials as a guarantee of correct information. For the sake of exemplification, I used a few of his reels that stood out to me. The first example, true or false, eating carbs at night will turn to fat. Whereby he states is false, carbs can improve sleep quality, only situation carbs turn to fat if you intake too much carbs. While I can immediately agree that indeed the first statement of eating carbs at night will turn to fat is false, what he stated is also false. Having a look at the laws of thermodynamics, the first law, or the conservation of energy law, goes by the fundamental principle that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred or transformed. To translate the application to nutrition and the human body, this would sound something like weight gain would occur if calorie intake exceeds expenditure, or what one burns, in essence placing them in a caloric surplus. Energy is stored, resulting in weight gain. If expenditure or what one burns exceeds intake or what one eats, in essence placing them in a calorie deficit, the body uses stored energy from fat or muscle, resulting in weight loss. We should also keep in mind that the body is an open system, therefore it is not a perfectly isolated system. It constantly exchanges matter like food and oxygen, but also energy like heat and waste with the environment. Therefore, a radical statement of the only situation carbs turn to fat if you intake too much carbs is categorically wrong. What dictates fat gain would be a calorie surplus, which does not necessarily come from carbs. Think for instance a football or soccer player for the American ones of you. Football players' diets are usually high in carbohydrates due to the demands of their sport. You could most definitely have a football player who eats only 10 grams of carbs, and I'm stating this ridiculously low number as it is a low amount of carbohydrates for pretty much anyone, and still be gaining fat, if the individual is in a surplus due to excess fats and or protein. So they technically speaking would be eating too little carbs, but eating too many other calories and still gain fat. Therefore no, the only situation carbs turn into fat is not if you intake too much carbs. Moving on swiftly to the second reel that caught my eye, which stated should you cut carbs or fat? With the response of, well, 1 gram of carbs has 4 calories, whilst a gram of fat has 9 calories. He then continues the reel with don't be an idiot and cut fats completely. But the hate on carbs is insane. In essence, he's defending fats, whilst claiming that the hate on carbs is too strong. Whilst I somewhat agree, albeit from what I have seen both carbohydrates and fats are equally hated, one's needs and bodily responses are strictly individual. What I mean is that one may need higher carbohydrates due to their lifestyle or sport they are performing, or they may need more fats for the same reason. There also is individualistic difference, whereby for instance, I have seen multiple bodybuilders cut their carbs to zero, close to zero, or even do carb cycling. In contrast to this, I personally function well on higher carbs and don't need to do that ever, even when getting to stage ready condition in the 4% body fat range. while on 359 grams of carbs, at my utmost lowest in the last stages of competition depletion, believe it or not, as shown in the snippet of totals from my contest prep file. What struck me the most is the insinuation here, where he ended the description of his reel with both have their own important roles. But if you're prioritizing one or the other, I know which one I'm choosing. Again, very bold, borderline cocky, but if you're expecting me to now insert a joke about his physique, you're in the wrong place, because that would be an ad hominem attack. And I am not here to dick measure with anyone, but rather speak about factual data and point out things that could be misleading. Welp, left the best for last, and my oh my, what a cherry on the cake we have. In this one he states, did you know your body doesn't absorb all the protein you eat? Let's proceed to separating where he is right and where he is wrong. If we talk in terms of bioavailability, which is the measure of how effectively the body digests, absorbs and utilizes dietary protein, then yes, things may seem decisively positive for the animal protein sources. One may point out that there's a fair variation between different charts circulating online, however upon an unbiased inspection, it would be fair to say that some animal protein sources do appear to be consistently at the top of these charts, and plant sources are usually after them. Therefore, at face value, he is correct, right? Yes, but literally so. At face value, or in isolation. Real-world experiences, however, are not always linear by design, and are a little more complex, especially if one does not account for other existing variables. This is where the nitty-gritty commences, and where contextualizing things becomes important. Why do we care about protein to begin with in fitness contexts? Well, usually it's due to its muscle-building abilities. We all know that proteins are the building blocks of muscle. When we put that into context and ask, okay, well, plant sources may indeed be less bioavailable, but does that have a real impact on muscle protein synthesis? The argument then becomes very different. If we take a look at the data, and there is plenty of it, a good example would be a recent study from 2025 named Similar Effects Between Animal-Based and Plant-Based Protein Blend as Complementary Dietary Protein on Muscle Adaptations to Resistance Training. Findings from a randomized clinical trial. This study included 44 untrained males, randomized to either a plant protein blend of soy and pea protein or animal whey protein at 45 grams a day, paired with resistance training for 12 weeks. Now, I know there are limitations to the study, but the results are interesting to look at nonetheless, whereby both groups had similar gains in lean mass, muscle cross-sectional area, and leg press 1 rep max, with no significant differences between protein sources. In other words, the study supports the idea that plant protein blends can be as effective as whey in the context of a high-protein, training-stimulated environment, which indicates a strong support for plant protein when total protein intake is adequate and thus rendering the bioavailability argument useless. Another study, quite recent as well from 2023, concluded high-protein vegan and omnivorous diets were shown to produce comparable myofibrillar protein synthesis rates and skeletal muscle hypertrophy in young adults when the total protein intake was high. This, in essence, suggests that the source is less important than the total protein and intracellular amino acid availability. Again, looking quite bright for the plant protein sources despite being, technically speaking, less bioavailable. Now, I'm not going to fill you with studies and findings, however what I can tell you as a vegan bodybuilder who loves academia, and has likely read most existing studies on the domain, is that the data appears to be uniform across the board, unless the study design is somehow purposefully skewed, which I will not get into here, as it's a complex topic which seasoned researchers know how to filter. So in conclusion, no protein source is 100% absorbed, we can agree. Animal proteins have slightly higher digestibility scores on average, we can also agree. However, when the total daily protein is sufficient, which is usually around the 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, the source has minimal impact on hypertrophy outcomes in resistance-trained individuals. Nitrogen balance and total essential amino acid intake would appear to matter more than the source identity. You can go ahead and try to debate me on these claims if you like. Anyhow, I hope this video has helped you filter out information online, as credentials don't automatically equate to correct information, as you could see in these few instances outlined here. I hope this video enlightened you in one way or another, and I'll see you in the next one.